Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy 2021 to you, and welcome to another exciting and fun-filled edition of Faith Matters. Somebody asked me, are you going to change up the format for Faith Matters in the new year? And that was an excellent question. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I have an excellent answer for you. No. Because this format, which we stumbled upon, let's be clear, this was not some deep, intentional thing that Father Chris and I sat down and said, how could we find a way to take this class and bring God's people into it via technology? No, this was literally a survival instinct to say, let's try it and see how it works. And praise God, it has been working.
I have a question, Father Rick. People asking change the format. Did you have any idea what changes could we even make? We can't join in person, or is that part of the question?
There's any number of different things that people want. Everybody certainly wants to be able to come back and do this in person. And you know what? Count me in that number.
Oh, count me in twice.
We're definitely there with you, brothers and sisters. But until we're able to do that again, this is, as far as I can tell, about as good as it's going to get. Because it gives us a way to converse. It gives you a way to share your wisdom with one another. And there's also a side benefit to it. We get to do this with people who don't necessarily drive to 10450 Gillespie in Las Vegas, Nevada. There are people who take part in Faith Matters, not just now, but there are people who actually watch this other than live. I can tell this because I see the counts every week. We'll have 25 or 30 people live with us in this conversation right now. And by this time next Sunday, 150 people will have watched what we're creating right now as we speak. So there's something to this format. There's some kind of hunger to just have an open conversation around the gospel. And since that seems to be working, I don't see any need to change that or to mess with that. So,
Did you notice too that people even comment late?
I do notice that.
They'll comment on Wednesday knowing they're not part of the conversation, but they just want to make a point.
Yeah.
You'll see the thread grows for days.
Yeah, and I see Kim Bodenheimer-Smith just logged in. Hi, Kim. Kim's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, brothers and sisters. And she is a faithful part of what we do here as Faith Matters. Another great reason why this format, in some way, shape, or form, is going to continue. Even when we can start to meet live again, it's going to be a blended format. We'll have an online component with a live class, and it's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing. It's going to be another learning curve. Hey, you know what? 21 is beginning just like 20 ended, with a lot of scurrying around and a lot of learning, and that's okay. So, now that I've tap danced enough and people have gathered, let's look at the gospel from this morning, because I want to hear what you all have to say about it. This is from Luke. The parents of Jesus went to Jerusalem every year for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor.
It's a happy ending.
Yeah, it is.
It's a happy ending. It's like a Hallmark card, right?
Right. But this is like one of the few, if any, glimpses we get of Jesus' childhood, right? Besides being the baby. This is like one
You're
of the
absolutely
only
right, yeah.
glimpses into his childhood life is this.
Yeah, for more childhood stories, we have to read the Quran.
Okay.
We have some in
Where
the
they go
Quran,
into it,
we have
yeah.
some in some of the Gnostics or some of the lost Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas has a couple of stories which are interesting. They're not canonical, but they are interesting nonetheless. But yeah, this is one of those interesting stories we get about Jesus. And Jesus is a 12-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. Parents, anybody remember when your child is 12? How well behaved are they? How much do they think of you? How dumb are you? How old do they think they are? Right? Let's see what y'all have to say.
No, I mean, we lost kids, so I can get in touch with the anxiety of Mary, but they were younger when we lost them.
We did, in fact,
They were
have
not
our
12.
own lifetime experience of
At
this.
least one.
The one that comes to my mind the most, which seems to be most like this, is we have 3 sons, and they are all within 5 years of one another. So we had 3 under the age of 5 at one point in time.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
we were talking about how when you go from 2 to 3, it changes everything, because then you have to go from the man-to-man to the zone defense. And anybody who knows basketball knows that the zone defense is nowhere near as effective as the man-to-man.
No.
The reason I say that is this: we were at some sort of event at our town park back in Massachusetts, and the kids were young.
Pretty young.
And the thing ended, and we packed up all of our stuff, and we had to park about, a good half mile away. And Jen had armfuls of stuff, and one of the kids, and I was way behind, and I had armfuls of stuff, and one of the kids. And if you were listening intently, you know what's wrong with this picture. When we got to the car, we realized we had all of our stuff, and we each had a kid, but there was no third kid. And we looked at one another and said, "I thought you had him."
So, yeah.
He was at the temple.
Well, no. So I dropped everything and took off at a dead sprint. I was 35 pounds heavier at the time and very out of shape. That was not a pretty sight. But I find my way back to where we had been in this sort of grassy bowl area, and there's this little 3-year-old kid, great parents that we are, just sort of hugging his knees and rocking back and forth, wondering what's going to happen.
At least he didn't go anywhere else, though.
Thank God.
He stayed where we would
Oh,
have
my
known
heart
where to
was in
look.
my throat.
Glad it didn't turn into a forensic files.
Right?
Yeah,
So when I read about
anxieties,
Mary
yes.
and Joseph searching for 3 days,
I know.
I think in our story, Sam was gone for 7 minutes,
Yeah.
and we were frantic. 3 days? Oh, my goodness gracious.
Right. Well, because he was older, they probably just figured he was with friends, hanging somewhere in the caravan.
Right.
You know, because you don't worry as much when they're teenagers as you do when they're, like, really little. So you let them kind of have some freedom. So that's probably why they didn't notice he was gone, right?
Yeah.
Till they got, he's not with your family? He's not with your
That's
family?
exactly it.
Crappa. Yep, had to go back.
Jenny says, "My girls are 12 and can school me at times." Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
They believe that they're so grown up and so ready for the world until they realize they're not. But those lessons are hard, aren't they?
Yep.
Rosalie says she believes Jesus was respectful to his parents, but she bets he was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. And I can give away Father Chris's sermon at the 8 o'clock, because he never preaches the same sermon again. So at the 8 o'clock, he said that Jesus was being sort of a smarmy teenage boy going, "Well, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know where I would be?
Right.
I'm a grown-up. Look at me."
Or
Maybe you didn't do it quite
Right.
that way.
No,
I
but
embellished a touch.
by then he knew that he was God's son.
Right.
Like he knew he was that. So, yeah, even more smarmy. Yeah.
Carol says, boys at 12 know everything.
Yep, they do.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, they do.
Right.
Brian says, this is an interesting subject. Jesus sees and lives in a spiritual world that most of us do not see. I agree with that completely, but as a 12-year-old boy, he's just... Imagine, everybody go back to when you were 12 years old and you were just starting to deal with the world in a different way. Now, overlay on that the fact that you are God Emmanuel.
Right.
How do you handle that, too? You think puberty's bad when you're a normal human being. Add in all that additional stress. And so the boy, Jesus, was likely starting to try to figure out how all of this worked.
Right. And he probably heard them speaking in the temple. Was like, I'm going to go and listen, and this is where I need to be learning right now.
Right.
So why didn't my parents know that I had to be there doing that stuff?
Yeah, Jesus certainly needed that time. Right. And let's talk for a moment about the experience he had in the temple. It's really easy to get involved in the franticness of the parents in this story, right? We all relate to that. Jen and I immediately go right to that place of fear. But talk about the teachers in the temple here. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Right.
So he was a precocious child at that age.
He was indeed. And in Jewish tradition at the time, children were to be seen and not heard. It was quite remarkable that a 12-year-old boy was able to sit among the elders and the teachers and even be in the same room with them, much less ask them questions and demonstrate understanding. That's remarkable.
Right.
It could be that there's an element, too, of foreshadowing, that had Jesus been the perfect child, and by perfect, I mean the child who did everything that his mother and father expected him to do and did it when it was expected of him, it might have lulled them into, and there's a spiritual component here because he is Jesus, we also can be lulled into that, oh, Jesus is just loving, and he's meek and mild, and he adores me, and we can forget that Jesus' love for us sometimes is corrective. There are times when my temple needs cleansing. I have tables in myself which need to be overturned, and I need to be metaphorically hit with a braided whip to make a correction, to repent, to shift. And this could be already, again, this is complicated, and Father Rick mentioned my sermon. I gave words to what Joseph would have said in the temple, since we only heard from Mary in the gospel. And they were stern to Jesus.
Oh boy, was I worried about what you were going to say.
Learn to behave. Learn to behave. But Jesus is also teaching them. It is not going to be just a bowl of cherries and a bed of roses being my parent. And I wonder if a little bit of shock at the age of 12, where Mary was jolted, as we heard. She was clearly shocked and hurt and frightened in this gospel story. If that didn't a little bit, this bit of foreshadowing, help her watching this same Jesus be crucified 20 years later.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a lot easier if she had had other shocking moments before where it was very difficult to comprehend him and understand and accept what was going on.
Yeah.
Well, and she clearly, that had to be part of it. Even in, in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, there's that whole story of, Jesus playing and making little figures of birds out of clay and then bringing them to life and having them fly around. Because Jesus had powers and abilities well beyond that of mortal men. It had to be a strange experience to be his mother. And Rachel makes mention of that, and she's like, well, Mary and Joseph knew this because of the angels and the visitations, that Jesus was divine from birth. So why are they so surprised with this? Excellent question. And I'm sure that's something that everybody has given thought to. I guess my response is probably this. knowing that he is that is one thing, but being the day-to-day parent of a child where you're all about care and feeding and the life that you get kind of in that rut, and I think you probably can forget that, oh yeah, this kid is not your average normal kid. There's other stuff here. You just sort of go about your business.
I agree with that. And also, just because you know generally, as they did, because the angels told them that he's divine and from God, the angels didn't flesh out the specifics. They just said, you're favored, Mary. Your child's going to be really special. Hey, that sounds great. Well, that special child went to the temple for 3 days without telling you.
Right.
And the angels did not tell her before her pregnancy what specifically that would mean. The angels did not say that when Jesus at a wedding turns the water into wine, you guys are going to snipe at each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
But then, as in this story, there's that little like, what's going on? What's going on with you? Well, they reach an understanding. In today's gospel, they get to the place of wisdom, peace, and greater knowledge and greater favor. Same thing with the wedding at Cana and water turning to wine.
For now, though.
Right. Did they think he was going to be perfect, like the whole way through his childhood? I wonder if they just thought he was going to be perfectly obedient.
I think that's likely.
And then when he wasn't, they were like surprised and astonished.
Maybe he had been a perfect child up till now.
Because at the end of this, he went back to being obedient to them. We don't hear him being not obedient until maybe the Canaan, where he was really willing to show his stuff, right? So I'm wondering if he
But Mary wins
except
that one.
it doesn't say he returned to being obedient. It says he was obedient kind of from this point forward.
Yeah, that's what
we
I
have
mean.
no idea if he was a model child or an absolute terror.
Right. And they were probably expecting not so much a normal child, maybe, because they thought he was going to be more divine. I don't know. I'm just guessing, right? What did people say?
We have a lot of people who are sharing their horror stories of losing their children.
Because it sounds to me like he's a
the funny thing is we just finished the holiday movie season, and of course one of the classics is Home Alone. And when that movie came out when we were, I think, in college, and at that point we were like, what kind of unbelievable moron loses their child like that? And
judge not.
we look at that movie a little bit differently because we did exactly the same thing they did. We lost another child in Disney World one time because we were just counting heads. And there was a little boy in a similar color t-shirt and was kind of walking along with us, and we had a big group, and it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're good. And then our child was gone. So yeah, we have a whole lot of sympathy for the folks in Home Alone now.
We have sympathy for Mary and Joseph.
Judy lost hers at a rock concert.
Yeah, see? Right.
Mary lost hers under a clothing rack in a store.
Yes.
Been there, done that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Rachel makes the point about he might have been through his bar mitzvah at this point. Good question. We don't really get that information.
Do we know when bar mitzvahs started?
I do not.
When that practice was a thing.
I don't know enough about Judaism to be able to do that.
Tell us about that.
I can't. I'm not thinking of anything in Torah which sounds like a bar or bat mitzvah.
Oh, no.
Brian's like, any other 12-year-old boy would have been checking out the females in the big city in those days. So,
Yeah.
It doesn't say he wasn't doing that too.
No, but he was more interested in...
Does 3 days have any significance, like a foreshadowing? Ooh, great question, Nathan.
Right, because of the 3.
Yeah, and that's another thing that jumped out at me when I was listening to the gospel this morning. 3 days. Boy, that's a long time. That is a really, really long time. And honestly, Jerusalem wasn't that big. They could have fanned out and covered wide swaths of Jerusalem, especially, I can't imagine Mary and Joseph came back by themselves. So for them to have done that 3 days, that just seems odd, especially when you probably would have gone to the temple first, since that was the center of all public and religious life at the time.
Yeah.
So I think there is something to that 3 days. Excellent question.
Symbolic.
Yeah, that it is Jerusalem too. I mean, there's
Right. Rosalie counters back. I love when Rosalie and Brian go out at one another. This is great. It's like being together again. She's like, Do you remember how those girls dressed in those days? Yeah, he wouldn't be checking them out.
Dress got all caps.
Yeah, but that's the mystery of the whole thing.
Okay, well, as the author and curator of Talks with Jesus, a vanity publication from the mid-1990s, and the format was people would ask questions of Jesus, and then we would prayerfully ask Jesus and get the answer.
Wow.
And a lot of people wanted to know about Jesus, middle school and high school age Jesus. Did he date? And assuming that you believe that this prayerful exercise worked, the answer was yes, Jesus did have a girlfriend, but he understood very young that it's sort of like, I don't want to go into Me Too and consent, but when you can understand the thoughts and feelings of others completely, it almost sets like an unfair advantage in the relationship, so that normal romantic interactions, and I'll leave that to your imagination, Jesus knew pretty young were not in his, there would be an imbalance there, which is why bosses should not sleep with the interns.
Yeah, correct. Right. The secretary.
Why the professors who are in their late 40s and have a wife shouldn't date 19-year-old single people at the University of blank. Because if the power and level is mismatched, it can't be fair, and it can't actually be truly, I don't want to use the word consensual, I want it to
Equal.
be just and equal and fair and emotionally advantageous to both.
Right.
So Jesus, starting at a very young age, loved people in a pure way that was non-sensual, because it was above sensual.
Yeah, it's agape, not eros.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And because of the
calling.
way he was, and because of his understanding, it couldn't be eros with appropriateness.
Right.
Yeah.
And he knew that
Interesting.
apparently very young, with his first girls that he would hang out with.
Yeah. All right.
So back to the earlier question about bar mitzvah, the wisdom of the group is filling in answers for us. Bar mitzvah is actually at 13.
Right.
Okay.
It's not in Torah. It's more from the Talmud era, and it actually began in the Middle Ages. So it would not have been a thing for. So Jesus never had a bar mitzvah.
Great. All
So
right.
I wonder if it was what's the word I want? It happened in time at the same time as the church was brewing up confirmation.
Yeah, it could be.
I don't know. Interesting. Interesting history, huh?
Yeah.
Because a lot of cultures have always had that 12 or 13-year-old thing where we acknowledge that childhood is ending and adulthood is beginning. And the church, if it hadn't celebrated, probably as it expanded, saw it in other cultures and said, you know what, we need to co-opt that in a good way.
Yeah.
Right.
And make that a religious something.
We're still getting a whole lot of stories about people losing their children.
Yeah.
And now people are commiserating, saying, "Oh, so good to know I'm not the only one." Yeah, right there with you, brothers and sisters. We lost 2 out of 3. So. Kelly says in Disney World, the kid wasn't lost, we were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because he wanted to do this certain thing.
That's how it
I'm going
goes.
to do it. Like stubborn. Yes. So you kind of see some of Jesus' early personality, too.
Right.
You know, he was focused on what his job was and everything, and not so much on what his parents were feeling, doing, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this must have been a really scary reminder to Mary and Joseph that this was not an ordinary child. And he was theirs to care for, and he was under their authority, but not the way a normal child was.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was Rachel, made a really good point, saying, wow, it's a shame that the teachers and the leaders of the temple when Jesus was 13 were not the same ones when he was 30.
Huh. Would they have changed out?
Well, they would have.
Yeah.
But that's a nice...
That's interesting. Who made that point?
I think it was Rachel. It was a ways back
I've
in
never
the feed.
thought of that. That's really interesting.
Well, except that here's my response. I think that's a lovely thought, but had they not done what they did, we wouldn't be here doing what we're doing today. It's the same as, if Judas had only been a better guy, if he had been more in his faith and hadn't betrayed Jesus, well, Judas had to do what he did for the story to live into itself and for us to be able to do what we do today. Right. If Jesus hadn't been born and done his ministry, been betrayed, been crucified, risen, and came back and given us the Great Commission, it would all be totally different.
Or they just thought he was a pain in the butt and didn't want to listen to him.
Or they thought he
tell
was a pain
them
in the
what
butt.
they're doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they could just been. It was some precocious kid showed up, gave us the what for. Great, now he's gone. We don't have to deal with him, or whatever. And they just went on their. Because who wants to be told by a 12-year-old that you're wrong or whatever that he was doing?
Right.
So. Yeah. Interesting. Ha.
Thanks for that explanation about romantic interactions, Father.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to make that question, but was afraid of being called blasphemous.
No, if faith matters, don't you agree, Father Rick?
You can ask those questions.
We could say anything and do anything we pretty much want. This is the forum for exactly that.
Ask the questions, because
this is when we ask the questions.
Yeah.
And we don't promise you we have the answers.
Right.
We will tell you what we think. We will sometimes give you the sort of what scholars through the ages have think, or what the combined wisdom of the church has come to believe. But we don't tell you that we have the answers. We don't force you to be dogmatic in our belief system. I'd like to have a discussion about the interaction of disease and spiritual causes in light of what we face today.
Okay.
Well, as usual, Brian, you bring up a really interesting topic 2 minutes before the end of our time together. So I don't think we'll be able to have that conversation today.
Wow.
Was Jesus a Sheldon? I don't know what a Sheldon is.
Sheldon Cooper?
Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory?
That's where I got that.
Well,
I don't know. I guess in a way he was like thinking in that realm that normal people don't think in, if you look at it that way. So that's Sheldon Cooperish to me.
For those of you who don't know, that's from a TV show where this guy is an unbelievable genius and goes on to win the Nobel Prize in physics. But because he has such a great intellect, he's a little emotionally stunted, and day-to-day interactions that we all take for granted sort of are a bridge too far for him. So
I don't know.
We don't know.
Right.
We do know what Jesus at 30 was like. We only get this one glimpse of Jesus at 12. I've always thought it was really interesting. There were a bazillion movies about the life of Jesus, the crucifixion. There are very few about the resurrection. But there's never been, as far as I know, any type of fictionalized account of what Jesus was like from 12 to 30. What was his life like? I've never come across one.
Shoot. Yeah, there are. And I've read it, and I can't remember.
Okay.
Angela something. Angel. Yeah, there is. Someone back me up, because I've read it.
I just want to give 15 seconds to Brian's comment, only to reinforce that as Brian clearly understands there is an interaction or intersection or a relationship between disease and spiritual causes. I guess I would just invite everybody to think of a greater fusion between earth and heaven. And as you're dealing with COVID or fear thereof, or literally the illness or deaths of loved one, do like Brian's suggesting, try to hold all these thoughts and fears with a little more element of that there's a spiritual interaction in all of it, including even if you've lost, as many of us now have, lost a loved one or a friend to COVID. Remember, even as we're mourning, they are in God's loving hands of life right now, and to let ourselves, just let spirit and body fuse most completely at times of challenge and disease and illness.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like the way we're wrapping up.
Amen.
God bless you, my friends. Thank you for your wisdom and your interaction. We will see you in half an hour for worship.
Bye, everyone.